Well, this morning, I'm going to start by just telling a story of a young man who was, least to say, off the narrow path. He was on a path that was wide. He was on a path that had very few boundaries. He was very much into the world, living as the world saw fit to live. He was enjoying, I guess you might say, the wilder side of life. He was enjoying drinking. He was enjoying partying. He was enjoying all of the things that come along with that. And needless to say, things was going south farther and farther, and things was getting less and less enjoyable as life went on. Well, this young man, he was in his 20s, he was a believer, but he was so far off the path that he thought to himself, it's amazing that God can even still hear me. And so he got with his wife, and he says, we can't do this no more. You just cannot live this way. We need to make some changes. Well, they agreed that it was time for a change. They needed to walk a better path. So these people moved, got away from everything they was around, and went to start their life over again. They moved. The husband got a new job. He was going to self-help classes to help him with his addictions. He was going to church. They was doing everything they thought that they could do and to get right with God and get right back on the right track. Well, as time went on, the husband thought things was doing quite well. He was working every day. They had an income. He had a roof over his head. And well, one day he came home from work and everything's gone. He came home from work. The house was empty. His son was gone. He didn't know where anybody was. And he was very distraught, to say the least. His world just came crashing down all at once. When this happened and he had nowhere to look, nowhere he knew to look, he continued doing what he had been doing for the past several months. He had continued going to church. He continued trying to get closer to God. He continued to pray. He prayed ferociously for two things mostly. He prayed for his son's safety. Even though he was not able to be there for him and take care of him, he wanted his safety. And he prayed for God to remove the desires for the things of his life that he knew was not good for him. I'll make sure I catch up with myself. During this time, he was quite a wreck, you might say. He was living life. He was doing the things he could, but it was still hard to deal with having that part of your life missing and gone. And the church he was attending, there was a lady there, and she come up to him one day during service, and she told him, she says, I know things are tough right now, she says, but you need to cling to God. You need to cling to God like a cat clinging to a telephone pole that was just chased up by a dog. says you got to cling to God with everything you got, everything you can hold on to. And so for the next while, this young man kind of lived on that. He just held on and prayed and just did everything he thought he could to keep things going in the right direction. He knew he had very little, if any, control. So God was the only choice he had. He had to give it all to God. One day, early in the morning, the young man got a phone call. And the phone call was from Oregon Child Protection Services. He got a call from them, and it says, you have 24 hours to get down here and be at this trial so we can decide what we're going to do with your son. His mother had been arrested and was incarcerated. So he got a plane ticket. By the very next morning, he was in Portland, Oregon, and he was sitting in the airport waiting, deciding what to do, what he should say in this court appearance. He had no money, and even if he had money, there wasn't time to get an attorney. So he just sat in the airport until it was time to go to court. And all the time he was in the airport, he could feel God tugging at his heart, saying, just tell the truth. Just be honest. It's going to be all right. So he walked in to the courtroom, and then they called his name. And he walked through the doors of that courtroom, and there sat the judge, an attorney for his son, and Oregon Child Protection Services in the state of Oregon. So here he is all by himself walking into a room full of high authority people, and he's all alone, or at least he feels all alone. As he walked into that courtroom, this young man said a prayer. He said a prayer silently to himself. He said, God. He said, it's just you and me, as he walked into that courtroom. So, by now, you probably got a pretty good assumption who the young man is. The young man is me, and it was definitely a very trying, difficult time in my life. I was feeling very alone. But this is where I want to take a break for just a second. And just to let you know, we will be back to this story. And just to let you know, God is amazing. So, but in the meantime, I would like to touch on a few verses. I forgot to bring my Bible up. I knew I was going to forget something today. The verses I would like to talk about today is in Psalms, book of Psalms, chapter 31, verses 1 through 5, and also 11 and 19. Just to recaption a little bit before we read this verse, David is the author of this psalm. David had a very full, eventful life. He was a shepherd, a very loyal shepherd. He was a very intense believer in God. God was his rock, for sure. He was a warrior, which he demonstrated in his battle with Goliath. He was a fugitive. He was on the run for some time. He was also a king. And with that, we'll go ahead and I'll read these passages. In you, O Lord, I have taken refuge. Let me never be put to shame. Deliver me in your righteousness. Turn your ear to me. Come quickly to my rescue. Be my rock of refuge, a strong fortress to save me. Since you are my rock and my fortress, for the sake of your name, lead and guide me. Free me from the trap that is set for me, for you are my refuge. Into your hands I commit my spirit. Redeem me, O Lord, the God of truth. David don't tell us what's going on at this particular time when he wrote this psalm. They don't really give us a clue as to what part of his life he was in. But in verse 11, it does give us a little bit of a clue of his state of being. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to read verse 11. Verse 11 reads, because of all my enemies, I am the utter contempt of my neighbors. I am a dread to my friends. Those who see me on the street flee from me. So, my interpretation of that is he's very alone. He's very distressed. He is solitary. And them are kind of the first words that come to your mind when you think about alone. But when you get a little deeper into alone, and there's some other words that really struck me. Alone also means lonely, deserted, and abandoned, which explains a lot how I felt when I come home from work and everything's gone. You are lonely. You feel like you are just totally abandoned. I mean, you don't have a friend in the world when you come home to a situation like that. In verses 1 through 5, I think David is saying to the Lord that protect me, rescue me, save me. He's not only wanting rescued, but he's needing a place to be. And for anyone who has ever battled any addiction of any kind, it don't matter whether it's abusive behaviors or maybe even food or anything, you feel you feel abandoned. You feel that you need rescued. You feel that you need protection from yourself even. David, he also confessed his confidence in the Lord. And that is probably where things, for me, you starts getting a little tough. When your family's gone and you have an idea where they are, but things have been done and that has restricted you from being anywhere near them, you are left with nobody to cling to but God. You have got to cling to God in times of trouble. He's never failing. He's never abandoning. When I went into that courtroom, I felt like I was the only one there, but God was following me and leading me the whole time. He was there when I was alone praying every night and every morning, protect my son. I was saying, that's where I learned you've just got to believe that God's going to do it. If you didn't believe God's going to do it, then you're wasting your time. You've got to believe that he is going to answer and he's going to do what he says he's going to do. He's always going to be there for you. He only wants the best for you. Putting your faith and trust in God is difficult, even when you know he's telling you to do something. Like, for example, when I was in the courtroom and they was asking me questions. They was asking me questions that they had no way of knowing the answer to. They had no way of investigating it. I had a 0 criminal record, but they was asking me questions, and I wanted, the human part of me was saying, don't answer it. They can't figure this out, no matter who they call, no matter where they look. But God would know, and God was the one that was telling me to be honest. And so I did do that. I confessed everything as honestly as I could ever recall in my memory. And God was faithful. Even when you feel that your life is out of control and you have nowhere to go, nowhere to turn to, remember, God is never out of control. God is always in control. Then I'd also like to read one last verse of 19. How great is your goodness, which you have stored up for those who fear you, which you bestow in the sight of men on those who take refuge in you. And David always praised God for his goodness. David did always have faith in his God. Well, I'm going to go ahead and return to the story now. Well, like I was saying, we went in and they asked me a lot of questions. And then the lady from Child Protection Services, she says, well, we need to take a recess. We need some time to investigate what he said, make sure what he said is true, what he said is honest. And so they took a break. We took about a 4-hour break. And they went and done the things they needed to do. When we came back from our recess, the lady from Child Protection Services gave her recommendation to the judge, and so did the attorney, and so did the state of Oregon. And they all agreed that my son should be placed in my custody and that everything concerning this situation from here on out would be taken care of in the area where I live, in the jurisdiction of my residence. And so, yeah, I was just, oh man, that was the greatest thing greatest words the guy could ever hear. And she said one other thing though, that this was kind of weird to me at the time because she said that, I don't know if any of you guys know much about self-help groups, but they have sponsors. And that was one of the people that was brought up in my questioning. And she told me, she goes, I have to tell you that your being able to take your son home had your sponsor had the most huge bearing on it you could ever imagine. I thought, wow, I wonder what he said. And what he said wasn't necessarily as important as what had happened. I went home. We got done with the court proceeding. We all went home. I got home, and the very next day, my sponsor called me, and he goes, you are not going to believe what happened yesterday. Well, I know I went to court. I got my son back. I says, there's not much that's going to top that. And he says, well, you better sit down and listen to this story. So he begins to tell me how his day went. He told me, he goes, me and my family got up, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. We decided we was going to go snowmobiling. So they hooked onto the trailer, headed up towards the mountain. He said, we was a little over halfway to the mountain where we was going to go sledding for the day. And he says, just from nowhere, he says, I told my family, we got to go back home. There's something wrong with the truck or something. I don't know what's going on. He says, but we just got to go home. So he turned around, and they went back home. His family's just, well, we just don't understand this, why the pickup's running fine. Well, when he got home, he walked in the house to get his car keys. He was in the house 30 seconds. That's when he got the phone call from Child Protection. So he's on the road, gone three-quarters of the way to his destination, turns around, comes back home for no known reason, to change vehicles, and gets a phone call that changed my whole world. There's no other way to explain that other than God was telling this man to go home. I am so grateful that he listened. A lot of times your obedience will benefit somebody else. Somebody else can get a great blessing because of your obedience. And that's a really amazing thing. And after the phone call, him and his family just went ahead and went on their day and just had a great time. Now, the conclusion for me in this story I already told you part of it. I want to also say that from a human standpoint of being alone, for those who are a child of God, we're never alone. And though a lot of the times we don't know why things are the way they are, God does know why they are the way they are. And God is enough. If you cling to God, He will provide. He will take care of you. And that's my story for you guys today. I hope it opened something up on some insight. I hope it touched your heart. Let's go to the Lord in prayer.